I'm very pleased today to welcome a guest of ours named Christine Perron. It's always special when we have a client come on and to share their story and talk about their experience. And Christine has been nice enough to find some time today to come in and talk about her case and a case we tried to verdict I believe it was last May. And I am very pleased to welcome Ms. Christine Perron. Christine, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so
It,
much.
it is my pleasure. Christine, we spent a lot of time together getting ready for your trial and
Mhm.
trying the case, maybe a week and a half, 2 week trial. And it is so nice to see you, and I'm glad you're doing well this holiday season. Um, but I invited you on to share your story um, and then I'll ask you some questions, of course. But I want to let the folks know a little bit about yourself. So tell us who you are, a little bit about your background, and tell us what happened to you.
Okay, well, I am retired. I live in a little town in West Georgia called Villarica, and I have my mom with me. She is later on in life, so we're dealing with some issues with hospice and all of that. So that's been a little bit tough, especially at the holidays, but she's hanging in there and she's holding her own, and we're really proud of her for that. So that's really good. We just, like everybody else, rushing like crazy, trying to get everything together for the holidays, and that's all doing just great as well. I am originally from Rhode Island and moved to Georgia later on in life. When I bought my house, my current home, it was a little bit of a fixer-upper, and I was doing some fixing upping when I had a fall on the roof. And I didn't fall off the roof, but I fell on the roof, and unfortunately, I broke my ankle, my fibula. So I had to basically see a surgeon to fix it. It's not exactly who I would have gone to, but I was kind of placed in a situation that put me in with a surgeon who didn't do the job that he was supposed to do, and in fact created lifelong permanent damage by his idea of making a correction of the break. So that left me in the position to know that something was wrong, something was definitely wrong. And I did pursue that to come to find out that there had been a major error in that surgery, and I was running out of time. And I said, I have to see about this. Something is definitely wrong here. And I went in search of an attorney, and I was referred to Lloyd Bell Law Firm, and I am eternally grateful for having met Lloyd and everyone in his firm who were just spectacular folks. I couldn't ask for anybody better to have represented me or to have helped me through a really hard time.
Well, that's very nice of you to say, Christine, and to our listening audience, I did not put you up to that, but it was
No, and it's all from my heart. Trust
well.
me, that is
Thank
from my
you.
heart.
I tell folks that one of the most rewarding parts of this job is the people you meet because they're so inspiring and people like you, Christine, who've been so resilient and have been through so much and never gave up. And as you know, it can be a multi-year slog sometimes and facing every obstacle in the world, which I want to talk about in some more detail. But I want to drill down a little bit as to exactly what happened to you, so it's clear to folks, and then we'll talk about how you concluded or suspected there was malpractice and how we investigated that. So you talked about how you were on your roof, and just so the folks listening, I almost said just so the jury, but just so the folks listening to this podcast and can kind of visualize this. But your roof is sort of a low pitch ranch house. You can kind of
Yes.
climb up with an everyday step ladder and get up on the roof.
Yes.
And then, as you explained it at trial, your feet kind of slipped out from under you, and you landed on on your rear end, but your leg was up underneath you, and it caused a break in the smaller bone in your leg, not the big shin bone, but the one beside it that is more about stability. Um, and then you went to the emergency room. Is that
Correct.
right? And then they
Hmm.
referred you to an outside surgical group called Resurgence. But you didn't go there. You ended up going to a podiatry group called Village Podiatry. Tell us why you went to Village Podiatry and didn't go to Resurgence uh,
Well,
as you were
okay,
referred.
they had referred me
Who's they?
to
Who's they?
um,
The hospital.
the hospital. Yes, the hospital
Right.
referred me to um, a group to that I assume would, and I assumed what would have been a cast.
Hmm.
And the reason that I ended up at Village Podiatry was the strangest thing. I had already had an existing appointment with one of the doctors at Village Podiatry for a small outpatient procedure for a little cyst I had on the side of that same leg, okay, on the outside edge of the foot of on the left side. So after I had the referral to go to these other doctors, I called them to cancel that appointment and said, I'm sorry, I fell. I broke my ankle. I have got to have an appointment. I need to cancel the surgery because I won't be able to keep that appointment. And at that time, the doctor hopped on the phone, which was unusual because I had been speaking to the front office, and she hopped on and she said, okay, wait, what happened, what happened? And I explained to her that I had what had happened, that I broke my fibula, I had been to the ER, that I was referred to a surgical group that would either cast it or however they saw fit to repair it at the time. And she said, okay, wait. She said, you don't need to go to an orthopedic doctor. You don't need an orthopedic doctor. You can simply come in and see. We have someone here, and he is very, very good at what he does, and you should come and see him. That's all he does. He does ankles. He repairs ankles, and you should come and see him, and he's the one, and he'll fix it, and it'll be great, and everything will be wonderful, and you don't have to worry about, we'll fit you in, come today. You
So
can
she was
come today.
sounds like she was lobbying for you to come see their guy versus the
She
folks you're
was
referred to.
Yes, she was really pushing it very hard to, and I even said, well, they referred me to an orthopedic group, and she said, oh, you don't need to do that. This is the guy.
And the
I don't
big
know if
thing
I'm
is,
permitted to use names or not.
oh yes, you of course. There's all public
Okay.
record.
So
It's Dr.
Dr.
Russell,
Correct.
who is the guy at Village Podiatry that this other doctor who you had seen about the little cyst on your foot was sort of lobbying, hey, come see our guy.
Right.
And then I
Dr.
remember
Price was.
the big selling point I remember was that they said, we can see you today. We can get you in today. And that was important to you, obviously, because your foot hurt.
Yes.
Is that what
Yes.
happened?
Well, it was, and like I said, I even a little bit deliberated about that because that's not who I was referred to, and but she was, shall we say, extremely convincing that I should come and be, we will make and they did. When I got there, there was a room full of people waiting to be seen, and they took me right in. They had the doctor come in. They did all the initial everything and unwrap the cast for the Dr. Russell to look at, and he did. He looked at the X-rays. And he said, this needs surgery to fix it.
So just
This,
right away, right out of the box, he's saying, looking at the X-rays, you need surgery.
correct.
Now we had testimony about those X-rays at trial, and we showed the X-rays, and anybody looking at them can see that your bone was broken. But what was notable about it is that all the bone was in alignment. There was no displacement. There was a very tiny little piece, minimally displaced, was described, but all the bones were, wouldn't have any broken bones, but the parts that were broken were all in alignment.
Hmm.
And our experts said, you should have just put a cast on this. There was no reason in the world this couldn't have been casted and healed up. But you were told surgery, and you believed him.
And I debated it in my mind at first. First of all, let me remind you also that I was on very strong painkillers.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't exactly in a place where I couldn't be manipulated very easily. And I did debate it, and I said, well, perhaps I should get that another opinion from the doctors that they referred me to. And he said, well, they're going to just tell you the same thing. An orthopedist is going to do the same thing. Seeing how you're already here, we should just go ahead and book. I mean, the surgery was booked in that same appointment and that same day for 1 week out from that visit. I mean,
So
it
you,
was
so
just
you,
do
yeah.
this. We're going to do this. We have to do this. Let's do it.
And obviously you trusted you trusted the other doctor because you had a relationship with her.
And I did.
And you,
And she came in the room and she actually, poked her head in the door. How's it going? Everything okay? What's going on? And at that time, I said that I guess Dr. Russell is saying that this is going to require surgery. And she said, well, why don't you just get the cyst while you're there at the same time and do both things while you're in the
sure,
surgery. And she
two for
said if
one.
he and I did trust her, and I liked Dr. Price
Yeah.
very much, and I did trust her opinion. And she said, well, if he said that's what it needs, then that's what it needs, and he can get the cyst at the same time, and you can get everything done all at one time, and
Yeah.
everything's going to be great.
So surgery scheduled. We go forward to surgery. Surgery seems to go well. You wake up. Obviously, you got a big scar. You've got staples in your leg. But and I'm sure, obviously, recovery is painful. But you think everything's proceeding like it's supposed to. Is that how you remember it?
I do. It was very painful for some time. And when it got particularly bad, and I really knew something was not right, when I went back and he moved me from the cast to the boot, when I was
Hmm.
put into a walking boot, and I couldn't stand it. I mean, it was so painful, and it was a very, very, very different kind of than that achy, breaky kind of surgical broken bone pain. It was a very flashing, hot, stabbing, burning, and I hadn't had that before. And I didn't know. I said, the boot is what I said, this is not the boot exacerbated it because it was riding that scar
Hmm.
really hard.
Hmm.
And it was, the stitches were gone, but the incision was raw. It was
Super painful.
yeah, it was very painful, but
So
it
you
was a
got
very different kind of pain.
yeah.
And I specifically remember I was talking to my boss about it at work, and at this point I was back at work in a boot.
Where were you
And
working?
at Publix. I worked at Publix Bakery as a cake decorator.
Your cake decorator.
Yes. Yeah,
We'll
made
probably
wedding cakes and
yeah.
all those beautiful specialty dessert cakes that you always see when you go into Publix. And
Yep. Yep.
and it was difficult because it requires standing, and it's standing all day, a lot of walking, a lot of standing. And I just felt, I said to my boss, I said, Bruce, I said, something, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. I said, I don't know how to explain this. It doesn't feel the same. It's, in a lot of ways, it's worse than it
Hmm.
was when it was just broken.
And he gave you the
And
name of somebody else to go
yeah, and
see. Or-
I started asking around, and I mean, I talked to everybody, customers who I knew were doctors, nurses,
Mhm.
and I finally, my best friend who lives down in Florida, I said, Darcy, I don't know what I'm going to do. What am I going to do? I said, something doesn't feel right, and I don't trust Dr. Russell. I don't trust him, and I don't trust his opinion. And I don't think he's being forthright, and I don't think he's being honest with me about this. He keeps brushing me off and telling me, well, it's got to heal. It's just the heal time. It's got to heal. It's really raw. but he wasn't addressing what I was kept bringing up repeatedly to him, was that same terrible feeling that was, and it was getting progressively worse. It would start out and it would come out of nowhere. And she went online. My friend went online looking, and she said, "Look, I found this guy. He's at Resurgence. He has a really good reputation. His name is Dr. Bailey. I think you should call him. I think you should make an appointment." And I did right away.
So,
And
Christine, you've been seeing Dr. Russell, the podiatrist, who's a trained surgeon. He's trained to do lower extremity surgeries like this.
yes.
Some people might be listening thinking, "What's a podiatrist doing surgery at all?" Well, some of them are trained for it, some aren't. Some are more restricted to dealing with bunions and ingrown toenails, that kind of thing. But some do have the appropriate training to do these surgeries. And now you're going to see a different doctor, an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Bailey. Did you tell Dr. Russell you were going to see Dr. Bailey, or did you just decide to do it on your own and get a second opinion?
I did not tell him that.
Hmm.
I went to an appointment with him, which ultimately ended up being my final appointment with him.
Well, hold on,
And
hold on a
I,
second. Let me interrupt for half a second because
okay.
we get lost with all the hymns and all the pronouns.
Oh,
So
I see.
so
Yes.
you went to see when Darcy
I
gave it.
went to see Dr. Russell, which I had a feeling was going to end up being a final appointment. I wanted that appointment to clarify with
Hmm.
him exactly where he stood on what was happening with me, the kind of pain that I was having, what my issues were. And I wanted to be perfectly clear what he had to say. And I made a recording
How'd you do
of,
that?
why did I?
No, no. How did you do a
How did
recording?
on just on my cell phone? I just it was very rushed, and I wanted to be very very clear about what he had to say, and I just set the recording on my cell phone and set it down on top of my coat.
Now, let me make one point real quick before you move on, Christine, because the different states have different rules about doing recordings where one party knows it's being recorded and the other party doesn't. In some states, both parties have to know if there's being an audio recording made. In Georgia, where this took place, only to comply with the law, only one party has to know about it. And but you were at this time making a recording. It sounds like for your own sort of own benefit, just to understand. Doctors will sometimes talk fast or give you a lot of information,
Hmm.
and as I understand, you wanted us to have a record of what he said, so you could refer to it and maybe understand it if there's something that wasn't clear during the appointment. Did I get
Right.
that? Did I get that basically right?
You did, because I didn't think anything about recording or illegal or legal or anything. It was for my personal record.
Well, this will come
Is
back into the story, a little bit of foreshadowing for our audience. But I'm sorry to interrupt you. So
That's
you're
okay.
back. You're back at the appointment. You're recording what's going on. What is Dr. Russell telling you at this? What turns out to be your final appointment? First of all, how are you feeling at this appointment?
Well, everything's about status quo. It's my understanding that this is a permanent condition,
Hmm.
and thus far, it has been a permanent condition. It's difficult to do things. I'm having to kind of relearn everything from 60 years or 50. I was in my 50s when this accident actually happened. So I've
Yeah,
got,
I'm talking specifically, Christine, about the appointment with Dr. Russell. At that
uh-huh.
appointment, how was your foot doing when
Oh, I
when you're
see.
recording the conversation with your cell phone? How are you in fact feeling at that time?
At that time, it was awful. It was really, really, I had been doing everything that he told me to do, hot soaks, ice packs, Epsom salt soaks, everything, keep it wrapped, every single thing that he was telling me to do, including all of the physical therapy. And at one point, the physical therapist said, "Well, there's really nothing more that I can do for you." And he kind of discharged me from the referral that Dr. Russell had sent them for me to do. And we had done all of those exact same treatments and, learning how to position my weight back on it and all of these things. And I did discuss this with him. And I said, I don't feel like this is right. I said, the hardware, it hurts. It hurts. I can't stand having it in there. I feel it. It is exacerbating this. It's making my skin crawl. I want it out. I
I mean,
want the hardware gone.
I remember you describing this in the recording as burning pain, as like an ice pick
Yes.
stabbing into your foot, and you described all these things in your record in this conversation, and
Yes.
then we went and of course, got the medical records, and none of this is contained in the medical record. I mean, you've describing all these symptoms, and his medical record sounds reassuring. You know, you continue to improve. You're making progress. All these things were discussed in trial, but moving forward, you left that appointment, and within a short time, went to go see Dr. Bailey for a second opinion. Do you remember that?
That's correct.
And
Yes, I did.
tell us about that appointment with Dr. Bailey.
Dr. Bailey was lovely. I went in, I explained to him everything that was happening. He did x-rays at the time. He had judged the split in the bone where the bone had slightly split off. It was not really healed. It's still somewhat separated, but he said that it was healed enough that if I really wanted that hardware out there, I told him, I said, I have to have this hardware out. I said, can you please, please, please? Dr. Russell doesn't want to do it. He said it was put in to be permanent. It is not meant to remove. He had mentioned that if he did remove it, he couldn't save the nerve, which I had questioned Dr. Russell about that at the time. What do you mean you couldn't save the nerve? And he went into a very convoluted talk of how the nerve was pressed under the
Plate.
metal plate
Yeah.
and the screws, and that if he
Which
removed
makes no
that,
sense at all. I mean, that would be a horrible thing to do, to compress and the nerve we're talking about is called the superficial peroneal nerve, which comes down the leg, originating the sciatic nerve further up the leg, and you would never compress the nerve or squeeze it between the metal plate and the bone. I mean, that would cause horrible nerve pain. But then you see Dr. Bailey, and of course, Dr. Bailey testified at the trial too, and he said, you might remember, he said that he suspected that the nerve had in fact been severed during the original surgery with Dr. Russell. Remember
yes,
that conversation?
I do. And I talked about that about taking the hardware out. I explained to him what Dr. Russell had said about that. He did a little tapping test where he just took his finger and tapped along the incision line. And when he hit right at the top of the incision, it was horrendous pain. It was just like somebody took a cattle prod to my leg. And I guess it's called a Tinel test. I didn't know that at the time. But he did do that test, and he said, and I said, what is And he said,
I don't
well, I
like the sound of
suspect
that.
that we have there's nerve damage here. And he said, now what I can try to do is I can inject like I guess it was like a lidocaine kind of thing that was meant to simmer down that nerve that was damaged or injured or somehow. Of course, we didn't know at the time because that was pre-surgery. So I said, okay, let's try that. So we did that. And at first it exacerbated it even worse. And he said to expect that it'll make it a little bit worse at first before it starts to calm it down. And it's only was very, very slightly that it did. And after a while, it kind of cropped back up and started fighting again. And what I later found out was that when Dr. Bailey did eventually do the surgery, when I had just said, this metal has to come out of my leg, I cannot stand this anymore. And he said, okay, let's do it. He did the surgery. At the time of the surgery, he went in and he cut slightly above the original incision that Dr. Russell had done when he installed that hardware. And he discovered at the time, and luckily for me, did a photo documentary of a severed nerve that
Yeah.
was completely severed.
Yeah.
And
I mean, to interrupt you, but on that
Mhm.
point's important. Yeah. Because so just to kind of paint a picture, the point of his surgery is to take out the hardware, but also just to kind of see what's going on. Because these soft structures, you can't see them on X-ray. So he goes in, he looks at your leg, and he sees that the nerve had been the superficial perineal nerve had been severed, and he took a picture, I believe, in part at least, was to show that the ends of the nerve had formed scar tissue called neuroma, and that takes a good while to develop. It doesn't happen immediately. And I suspect um, Dr. Bailey wanted to make sure nobody could point back at him and say, "Hey, maybe you're the one who cut the nerve." And he's like, "Hold on."
Mhm.
So he pulled out or had somebody pull out his cell phone and document this, which is good medicine. I mean, it's smart personally
Yes.
because he certainly didn't sever the nerve, but I think it was very helpful to show the jury, it was a little gruesome, show the
Yeah,
inside of your
they
leg,
didn't like that too
but
much, some of them.
well, but it was clear as day that this nerve had been severed and had
It
been
was.
severed during the original surgery. So, so we go forward and just kind of move things along. Um, so you had experienced, this condition called complex regional pain syndrome. It used to be called RSD, or reflex sympathetic dystrophy, but it's a very nasty disease that can happen if there's nerve damage, and it's a chronic, as you know, this is more for the audience than you, Christine, because you're living with it, but it's a
Mhm.
chronic pain condition which is characterized by burning and stabbing, and you can have skin changes, toenail changes if it's in your lower leg, and it can just be very, very life affecting. Can you share a little bit about what it's like to live with CRPS just on a day-to-day basis and what that means?
Sure. Yeah, it's I guess maybe on a lower extremity it's even harder because it carries your entire body. And even just to walk, most people just they don't think twice about running up a set of stairs. They don't think twice about jumping off a step. They don't think twice about walking rapidly or even running or jogging, which I can't do any of that anymore. I have, which seems as though will be a permanent condition of a drag in my leg. My foot drags, my leg drags. It doesn't have any of the flexibility that it had because every time that muscle pulls, every time you step forward and your foot, the ball of your foot, it's pulling and pulling and pulling on that muscle, and it stabs and it burns and it stabs, and it's just like ice picks just running. And then it's not even just a weight carrying. I can be sitting in a reclining chair with my foot lifted up, and then all of a sudden it's just this jerking pain where it's like, oh
Mm.
my God, it just hot, searing, burning, stabbing pains, and it travels. And sometimes it's not even on the incision. Sometimes it's just on the top of my foot, and it stays in a chronic state of when an extremity falls asleep, and like if you're laying funny on the sofa or something, and the expression your arm falls asleep, and you wake up and it's like, oh, that burns, it burns, it burns, and you're trying to shake it and wake it up, and you get these tingling, burning
Hmm.
sensations as it's trying to come back to life, as it were. My foot, mostly the whole top of my foot, across from my big toe, from the outside all the way across the top and all the way to my ankle and up that outside edge of my foot, it stays in a chronic state of waking from being asleep. So it's incessant burning and stinging and
Yeah.
pinging, and just overall it just aggravates me because it's incessant, and it's always there no matter what I do or what time of day it is or what I'm doing.
Well, I know when we first met, if I remember correctly, you said that you uttered the sentence that almost every client who comes to see me with a potential medical malpractice case, they all tend to say the same thing. They say, well, I'm not the kind of person to sue. And there's reluctance, maybe some feelings of guilt that creep up. And, the idea of suing your doctor is an idea that a lot of folks just aren't comfortable with and would never dream to be, quote, the kind of person to sue until it's their foot, until it's their loved one who's in pain or in disability or can't work and support the family, until life catches up. And then I always have to reassure people, it's like, well, look, this is, everybody's responsible for their conduct. And if a truck driver's going too fast and hits somebody, the proper remedy is to hold them accountable. And that applies to doctors and lawyers. If lawyers goof up, cause harm, which can happen. But we had that conversation, and this was years before. And then there was a very lengthy process before we could get to trial. Of course, we got interrupted by COVID, which basically shut the courthouses down for about 3 years. You were very
Yeah.
patient during that process, but finally we get to trial. And what I'd like you to do is talk about the experience of going to a medical malpractice trial as the plaintiff, as the patient. I've talked a lot about what it's like from my perspective as an attorney, but talk to us about what it's like as a patient and what that feels like.
Well, and it was difficult because I wasn't comfortable with suing an attorney, suing a doctor, hiring an attorney. And I hadn't really considered that much. I just assumed I was going to live with that. But people in my life kept saying, you have to do something about this. This is not right. This is damage that's done. We have proof of damage that was done. This is going to not go away. Basically, Dr. Bailey had pretty much told me this is not going to go away. We've done everything that we can do. I did an implant. I did all these different doctors that I went to see about different ways to stop this from happening. And once I really hardcore realized that this was a life-altering, life-changing event that was going to keep me from ever realizing the full potential, especially in my later years, that I had to do something. And that was when I knew I had to reach out and find somebody who could help me through this and walk me through this, because I had no idea what I was getting into and what boat I was jumping into on this. And luckily I had a really good captain in Lloyd Bell to steer my ship through this,
Well,
because
I appreciate that.
it was overwhelming at times, just dealing with my end of things and going to this specialist and going to that specialist. And I continued doing all of these things. I still am searching for remedies to try to at least alleviate some of this. I mean, heavens to Betsy, I can't even have someone sleep in my bed with me. Okay. Imagine what that does to a relationship.
Hmm.
Okay. And out of fear of being kicked or being bumped into or, just having even a dog jump on the bed is the first thing I do is recoil and jump and pull my leg in to make sure that, I mean, it was life altering, and it is life altering. And I just knew that I had to find the right person to help me on a journey. And I know it sounds a little cheesy to say that, but it was a journey, and it was like a 5 or 6 year journey. And part of it was because of COVID, but it was
It was a long road.
confusing for me to be able to know, and very educational too. I learned a lot of things from you and from others in your office about how things work and how things go and how we would have to proceed. I was unfamiliar with all of this. It was all brand new.
And I
So
don't,
it was,
Yeah.
good to have the kind of guidance that you and your entire team provided the support that I needed to keep my head above water through all of this.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head too about the importance of the team because it really does take that. I mean, these are major cases, and it takes a big time commitment. But everybody can't do everything, so you have to break it up. And there's some things the attorneys can do, things paralegals do, of course. So it's a real team effort, and then of course the patient, the client is part of the team as well, and you are a wonderful team member because you had a very active role in this case. And a couple of things that just stand out in my mind, I'd like you to maybe comment on is the length of time it takes to get to trial. You got to stay patient. We sort of talked about that, but then so you have this long sort of period of time where you feel like nothing's happening, or you're kind of stuck at the schedule of the courts and their availability and those types of things. But then you'll have moments of activity, such as your deposition, where you have to sit under oath and be questioned in very specific detail about all the different elements of your claim, how it's affected your every aspect of your life, your employment, your relationships, maybe your intimate life, all those things. Um, so what was that experience like for you, Christine, going through that?
Um, it was, well, I will tell you, I was nervous about, I had done a deposition one time prior, years and years and years ago. Um, and I didn't really remember much about it. And it was a whole different circumstance. And the one thing I remember that stood out the most to me was that I felt I could answer honestly, and I felt that you had my back.
Hmm.
And that was the most important aspect of doing, because they were rough. I mean, they were really rough. They were basically flat out accusing me of making things up. They were accusing me of exaggerating things, and I wanted to just look at them and say, why don't you just shut up? You have no idea what my life is like. You
Yeah.
have no idea what I'm living.
Yeah.
Stop demeaning me. Stop trivializing my
Yeah.
life circumstance. This is a terrible way for me to have to live. And I just wanted to scream it at them. And I was so grateful that you kind of also, I would just kind of look at you and I could tell by the way you were responding to me, temper, don't let them rile you.
Yeah.
Don't give them what they're asking for, because that's what they're trying to do. And I was really, really grateful that I was able to keep it more tame and not let them pull that ugly side out of me, because that only makes me look as bad as they are. and and I was really, really glad that you could help guide me through that. And when they were inappropriate, you would object to that and not allow me to answer, or when they were being ridiculous or being stupid, that you would just write. And they were, and a couple of times they really were, and you really raked them back in very quickly. And I was starting to answer them, and you're like, you don't need to answer that. That's not an appropriate question. And I felt very protected and very guided through that. And I think that made a big difference in terms of the quality of the deposition that actually came out of the process. And we had to do it twice.
Right.
Remember, we had to go
Yeah.
back and redo the deposition when they changed their legal team. And they
Well,
insisted.
there was right, and they were allowed to ask sort of catch-up questions because so much time had gone by.
Correct.
They
Yes.
were able to ask more, questions more current.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's a couple of points on that. It's easy if you're sort of in this business and you take a lot of depositions. And I take a lot of depositions. Our firm does, and it 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 feels not routine, but it feels part of our world. But if you're the person who's walking the walk and is living with the injuries, deposition can be a frightening thing because there is, I mean, in fairness, the defense has their job to do, and their
Hmm.
job is to explore, discover and see if there are areas where they can defend their doctor. That's the system we have. It's a great system, but sometimes people can overstep, and it can happen on either side. But I see it a lot with defense lawyers who will sometimes get more aggressive and forget that there's a human being on the other side, even though they're an adversary, even though, you as the defense lawyer take your job very seriously, of course. There's still real people involved beyond the pleadings, beyond the context of just the legal case. There's a real person who suffers. And the better defense lawyers, and there are many that I deal with who are just very high quality human beings and lawyers, get that, and they're respectful in the process. Not agreeable necessarily, but respectful. And that's one thing I enjoy about being in this area of law, is the quality of of many of the defense lawyers that we deal with. But that's a tough process from a plaintiff's point of view, and I appreciate you listening to me and not pulling their head off, as you put it, and yelling at them,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
that's never to our benefit to go that route.
Exactly.
Um,
And you had forewarned me about that, and I was really trying to be extremely patient with them, and especially that second go around. There was something about that second go around that it was different attorneys. It was they just they acted like they were bored, like I was wasting their time, as though I were
sort of inconvenienced.
creating a situation that didn't exist,
Right.
and it really was off-putting to me, especially because I had been through that the first time, and you did warn me about that, and you did tell me about that, and even still, they poked and they prodded, and they got me to the point where I really just wanted to say something, and I was glad that you kind of reined me in on that and kept me under control, because it did make a difference in the term of the end of the deposition, because it gives you credibility. It gives you a credibility of not being some whack job who just flies off the handle at every little insult, or what's another word I guess can say, and they were insulting several
It feels
times.
so attacking because they're,
That's the
you know,
word, attacking. I felt
yeah, it feels
attacked. I did.
attacking, and you feel like you're being attacked. I mean, I could tell this because they're, do you really hurt, or is this, are you just making this up to try? And the implication is that you're pretending or exaggerating, to try and get as much money as you can, as if you would take, as if you would ever voluntarily live in the way you live and the pain you live in for any amount of money. I mean, nobody would. At this
Exactly.
level, with these kinds of disabilities and injuries, there's not enough money in the world where somebody would say, okay, I'm happy to live, with miserable pain every day as long as my bank account's full. That's just not how human beings are. The most important thing that we have, as in terms of our quality of life, is our health and the ability to enjoy the things we enjoy. So I'm going to wrap up. We're getting close to our time here, Christine, but I wanted to just finish the story out. So we went to trial last May, and it was about a little over a week and a half trial. You testified. It was a very interesting case for a lot of reasons. I remember Dr. Bailey testified by Zoom on the big TV. We had experts fly in from around the country. Of course, you testified. Your sister, who is an author, Andrea Perron. Some of our listeners may know her or heard of her books. She came in and testified. So it was a major undertaking of a lot of folks participating to tell the jury the story, and it was hotly defended by very capable, experienced attorneys. And ultimately, though, the jury listened to you and they believed you, and they cut through it all and they said, "We believe you. We know you're suffering. This should not have happened." And they returned a verdict in your favor of $4 million, which is very, very challenging and significant verdict for essentially an invisible injury. You look fine, from the outside. You're not in a wheelchair. And we're very pleased, much more than we'd ever been offered. I don't think we ever offered anything by the defense, or very nothing of that scale. And the jury listened to you, and they spoke to us afterwards, I remember, and wanted to let you know how much they were concerned about you and wished you well. I just remember being a very moving and profound moment. And I just treasure those moments in this work because they're special. And it's the system working like it should. It's perseverance. It's achieving what we set out to 5 years before when I first met you.
Yeah.
But
And and it gave me validation. It gave me the feeling I didn't even know how to react at first. I mean, she just read that verdict and I was like, "Oh my God, they believe me.
yeah,
They don't think that I was making this up. They do understand. They understand. They validated my troubles in my life and my problems that have arisen from the challenges of dealing with a permanent, and I'll just say it, disability. I am permanently disabled, have a permanent disability from that surgery. And and you're right, you can't really see it. You can see it in the gait, you can see it, but if you just looked at me and I was standing there, you wouldn't
yeah,
see any kind of injury that was like that. So it is kind of invisible and apparently notoriously difficult and challenging to bring these cases to court simply because of that. It's hard to prove, and I always thank God to this day that Dr. Bailey did what Dr. Bailey did in that surgery, because that really was very, very helpful in terms of proving this case and having something to show and having something real that you could present that wasn't what the defense would have you think was imaginary. And it was, I felt vindicated, and it was very rewarding in that sense of, oh wow, okay, thank you so much for understanding. And I turned around, I looked right at the jury and I said thank you so
yeah.
much.
I remember. I
And
remember.
it was very heartwarming and heartfelt for somebody to not accuse me of falsehoods and faking and as their attorney said, exaggerating my situation. And they did try very hard to get
Yeah.
the jury to believe that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And because of you and your team and everyone that came to be my support and my lifeboat, as it
Mhm.
were, we prevailed in the end, and I will always be so very grateful to you and everyone at your firm for that.
Well, thank you so much, Christine, and thank you for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun to catch up with you, and I
Yes.
really appreciate you sharing your story. Hopefully, your story may help others out there who, felt some of the same feelings that you felt when they've encountered the healthcare system and it
And if
has
I can say
treated them well.
one
Yeah,
quick thing,
yeah, yeah.
one thing that came out of this very much so was for people to know, okay, you know yourself, you know your body better than anybody in this world. Don't discount yourself. If you feel like something is that wrong, that something went that wrong, or something didn't happen that should have happened, or happened that shouldn't have happened, trust yourself.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt to ask. It doesn't hurt to pick up a phone. It doesn't hurt to get an outside opinion. It doesn't hurt ever to speak to someone about it, because it was like I said in the very beginning when I came to you, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know if I even had a case.
Right.
And it was you folks that said, oh, yes, you do. You are legitimate. You are, this is. So trust yourself enough
That's
to believe that if you need help, go get it.
great. A great point. You have to be your own advocate, and
Yes.
you got to stick up for yourself and ask questions, even if these smart, highly educated doctors might make you feel not so smart. It's your body, it's your life. So
Yes.
thank you again so much, Christine. Great to
Thank
see
you.
you.
You
Thank you for
too.
everybody listening today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on Face the Jury.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.